climate class conflict, climate class struggle is a political project. So it is based on the idea that there is no fight for a better climate or a socially just green transition if we are not able to first recognize all those subjects, those social subjects which are more affected by climate policies.
We love the fact that you love freedom.
Green transition. When we first heard that, we said, well, we are done with those smoking pipes that we inherited from the era of great industrialization. We told ourselves that we will live better and that we'll end this vicious chain of conflict in which we find ourselves with other species and with the environment itself. But soon after we saw that the green transition, as formulated by the Western powers, is nothing more than a tool through which energy, wealth and labor are accumulated at the center. Welcome to another episode of our series on pervasive infrastructures. Our guests today, Jacopo Bonasera and Marco Meliti, will guide us through the actual issues of the climate class struggle.
Marco Meliti and Jacopo Bonasera are researchers in Italy. They are politically involved with Precarious Disconnections, an Italian collective, and where they live, in Bologna, they are part of anti-racist and migrant struggles organized by Coordinamento Migranti. As part of Precarious Disconnections, they are involved in activities and initiatives organized by the Transnational Social Strike Platform and Climate Class Conflict. Now, Marco, Jacopo, you pointed out in your work how large investment packages promoted by the European Union, for instance, the Recovery and Resilience Plan, are used for militarization and externalization of the European borders. These projects are accompanied by projects related to the green transition and the optimization of a European integrated logistics system. So we see two logistic systems of the same infrastructure mirrored in each other, one intended to accelerate and simplify the transport of goods or of weapons, for instance to the Ukrainian border, and another system of logistics intended to slow down and to control migratory flows according to economic and political needs. In your opinion, what is the role of the green policies here?
Yeah, first of all, I would say that when we talk about the green transition, we are talking about a process that has been in place, a set of policies and of capital investment that has been in place now for almost 5 years, more or less, and has passed through different phases. First of all, it was launched as part of the post-pandemic EU plans for resilience and recovery, no? As you mentioned, and in this and in the same period, it became also part of US, for example, federal policies for energy and reindustrialization. And then clearly the beginning of the war in Ukraine changed radically the scope and aim of all European policies, as the EU started being more and more involved in war policies and militarization and militarism as an ideology overall. So also climate policies were bent to these different and new aims. And then we have now, after more than 2 years of the war in Ukraine, and with the war on Gaza as well, and so in a scenario of in a world scenario of war, which is changing again and again and deepening some processes that we have been seeing starting 2 years ago. In terms of the climate policies, I would say that at the beginning, if we look back at 2020, 2021, after the wave of global climate strikes started by Fridays for Future and then other organizations, it was quite clear that European governance, I will mention European governance because it's easier for me, but most of the things I think apply also for Western governments in general. But for mostly for instance, in the European governance, it was clear that they were also answering a strong claim, a strong message coming from civil society, from younger people mainly, and for a better future, for a claim for a future that is not hijacked by pollution and inequalities, and that message was institutionalized in some sense in progressive policies, which aimed at reforming neoliberalism. So we saw that a lot of investments were and plannings and programs were moving in the direction of strengthening the European Union and its relationship with its member states by means of billions of fundings, and this was seen also as a way to solve the pandemic crisis and specifically the problems that the pandemic crisis had shown in the transnational value chains, in the availability of essential and skilled workers, and over the control of resources needed for high-tech production. So the green transition was all about this, no? And then the war changed everything, and also the scope of the EU green policies. We saw this. I think the main example was the Repower EU plan, forwarded by the European Council, guided by Frau von der Leyen in 2022, which aimed at changing all the logistics of energy supply of the EU. Mainly gas was the problem, because that was the period where the sanction began against Russia, and so there we saw, I think, that under the excuse of the green transition, so the idea to do without gas, the European Union forwarded policies, advanced plans for changing the way states had to supply to get their energy supplies. The interesting thing, the important thing also politically, was that this energy union had to be open to states, especially to Eastern European states like Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, the ones more tied to Russia dependency, and in the perspective of strengthening an economic and market integration, and under the banner of the European single market, of course, which was a logistical integration, but never intended as a political integration, of course. Then, if we see it now, I think that the situation has changed once again, and we see that more and more money are spent towards military projects, and a lot of member states in Europe with national governments that have turned to the right are kind of backing off from these green transition plans. We see new examples of climate denial. We see repression of climate movements. We see governments interested in defending national capital against any climate, against the idea that national capital have to pay for the climate goals, which have a cost, of course. So I think that now the situation has changed again.
Marco, you say in an article that the green transition becomes an opportunity to manage migration in the Mediterranean while promising a more livable climate, greener capitalism, and overall economical, political, and social stability. How exactly are the green policies used to control the political capacity of African countries? And tell us, what is the network of cooperation agreements on energy and migration between Europe and Africa?
Well, yeah, migration and climate policies are two key pillars of European partnerships with the southern neighbor. Um, with this, I mean that both European and national policies tend to connect, to link these two different policies, both from a material and from an ideological perspective. When I talk about material connections, I mean obviously that there are a lot of fundings, a lot of money which are meant to spend in a related way. So, for instance, 2 years ago, Morocco became the first European green partner, and in March, the last year, received almost 300 million euros to foster green transition and simultaneously to counter migration. But this is just one example out of many. We can say something similar from the Italian perspective, for instance, which is Italy is one of the main, also because of its far right government, one of the main actor in this process. So Italy signed this memorandum with Tunisia, in which cooperation to counter migration is linked to the creation of sustainable jobs and the stimulation of renewable energy. Um, I guess this last example also shows us the connection I was telling you about, which is not only material but also ideological, because green plans are supposed to deliver a socially just climate in which business can grow and job vacancies can be filled, and this is true both for North African countries and for European countries. So, as a consequence, migration flows should decrease and European borders should be safe. This is the kind of logic that is behind this connection. However, in fact, this means creating new opportunities for transnational capital to grow and to directly affect and command the living and working condition of more and more people. For instance, also referring to something that Jacopo was telling you about the relationship between Europe and Eastern European countries and their integration into the logistical integration, this kind of agreements and partnership I'm referring to are meant on the very same line, but with North Africa. So there are pushes to privatize for African economies to privatize their energy sector, which is one of the main interests, the European interests in North Africa, especially after the start of the war in Ukraine, and also to promote reforms to attract international private capital, so that there are those kind of investments which should create those jobs that eventually bind to a place those who are otherwise on the move, so migrants. And finally, I would like to mention from the Italian perspective the so-called Mattei Plan, Piano Mattei in Italian, which is a collection of partnerships promoted by the Governo Meloni, so the Meloni government, sorry, which is a collection of partnership with African countries on migration, on climate, on agriculture, and on other matters, which these plans not only reproduce what I was telling you about the previous plans, European plans, but also it aims to nourish and reproduce a skilled workforce which is potentially ready to work both for the interests of private international actors, both in Africa as well as in Europe. And this reveals us something about the green transition, as Jacopo was also describing. That is the fact that wherever it is implemented, they are implemented, transition plans indeed need labor, living labor, and migrants suits perfectly the fantasies of capital and states when they are thought as something that can be exploited both at home or abroad with their movement. And this also, I guess, tell us something about the idea, actually the strategy, the well-structured European strategy to externalize border to respond to the movements of migrants. I mean, instead of thinking about it as the road towards the construction of a fortress, unbreakable fortress, this management of borders looks more like a way to police and patrol borders and decide who, how, when can cross and can enter. And these obviously clash with the autonomy and the freedom migrants assert and express when they move.
Marco, but very short, tell us,
Yeah?
it's only the Western European countries that have interest in privatizing different energies, such as the energy industry in Northern African countries, or there are also some other big powers?
Well, obviously not. Obviously, this is part of a larger geopolitical conflict between Western powers, with China, Russia, and the US as well. However, since our let's say political landscape is harshly informed from Europe and from European plans, we mostly focused on it and try to bridge the gap that this kind of plans actually creates, showing that there are connections and we could politically practice this kind of connections.
Listening to you speaking, I was thinking, in fact, this brings us back to the concept of imperialism, political imperialism, where in fact green transition is a component of imperialist politics in Europe. Would you agree with this statement? Like, put it that bluntly.
There have been a lot of calls, especially against the Mattei plan I was referring from different African organizations, which more than imperialism talks about neo-colonial logics. So this idea that Western powers can come and manage and decide about resources, workforce, and whatever. Actually, the reality seems more complex because, for instance, there are strong assertions also from African countries, such as, for instance, we can think about Tunisian president way of managing highly racist way of managing migration and controlling migration in his country. This is something which, let's say, establish a difference between an idea, a classical logic, which just depict these countries as puppets in the hands of Western power. It is actually way more struggled. I guess our point of interest should be always focusing on those who directly are affected by this kind of policies. In this case, migrants, whether they are in encampments in Northern Africa, whether they are crossing the Mediterranean, or they are exploited in more or less green industry in Europe.
Mm. However, we shouldn't forget the fact that imperialism and colonialism have always worked with the help of a local ruling class that ruled, in fact, and exploited in the name of imperial powers, I suppose. But let's move on to another question. We live in an economy based on fossil fuels, we see how new mega projects change the landscape, the balance of natural resources and political power. Neptune Deep in Romania, this new large exploitation of natural gas from the Black Sea, the coal mine in Lützerath, Germany, the wind farm in Vetrino, Bulgaria, or the new lithium exploitations in Serbia. All these examples are developed for the benefit of corporate capital, an alignment of private and state interests, one might say. At the same time, the European Union enforces many policies and standards, placing the responsibility on the individual, like the famous carbon footprint that each person imprints, let's say, on the environment. Can you describe for us the climate class struggle and the differences and how this differs from other, let's say, climate struggles that are maybe in the interest of private capital and private property?
Well, yeah, I would start by saying that climate class conflict, climate class struggle is a political project. So it is based on the idea that there is no fight for a better climate or a socially just green transition if we are not able to first recognize all those subjects, those social subjects which are more affected by climate policies at large, those climate policies that Jacopo was telling us about in answering the first question. So as the green transition regards capital accumulation, it is about logistics, it is about industrial policies, but it is also about the regulation of migrants' movement, the way in which women's reproductive labor is translated. For all these reasons, it cannot be seen just as a simple fight for a better climate. Because fighting for climate justice means tackling the problem of how the climate crisis is exploited both by government and capital, as Ovid, you were also saying in the questions, to accumulate more capital, to reproduce social hierarchies and inequalities on which it rests. And in order to do so, I guess the climate class conflict hypothesis says in order to actually challenge this power, we need to accumulate our social power, our political power, which is now scattered along all those lines we've been discussing and describing. So for sure, we see pieces of this climate class conflict in the struggles you were mentioning against the expansions, the reproduction of fossil fuel project. As we have seen, the increased repression of these kind of fights since the start of the war and the war in Ukraine and the ideological militarism, which let's say gives sense for this kind of repression. But I guess we can see pieces of this climate class conflict also in struggles which are apparently not for climate. Take, for instance, the auto workers' struggles in the US last year, which happened last year. Because if you look at this kind of struggle, you can see from an ecological perspective, you see just a bunch of workers, maybe old and near to retirement, who are striking to defend the production of polluting cars. However, if you go into the strike they've been fighting, you see that the so-called big three in the automotive sector, which are Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis, were using the transition to electric car to prevent wage raises, to reduce the unionization, and to relocate part of production into the US South, where there are more favorable conditions to capital. That is why we see in this clash, we saw this clash as part of a broader climate class conflict, because it literally turned the green transition into a battlefield and challenged capital power and those power relationship which define the new regime of green accumulation. In fact, there was some kind of affirmation, some kinds of construction of that social power, that political power I was referring to in this kind of struggle. And we can see also a connection with climate struggles in general, because both workers and climate activists do actually strike against capital, which should decide our condition of working and living condition in the future. So let's say this is something that these two kind of struggles have in common. And to conclude, I think that both workers and climate activists face this same system which rests on the high exploitation of women and men, on the control of migrant movement, the exploitation of free reproductive work done by women. And this is a potential connection that we must politically construct and practice.
That's right. And you gave examples, the struggles that are going on in the United States. And this shows us that we cannot talk about the climate movements without talking about transnational movements. There are some particularities of each region that give a method to the way people organize against private state projects. What do you consider to be the difficulties of transnational organizing, and why do people organize or feel the need to organize in the first place?
Yeah, this is a key question, one that I would say we within the framework of the activities of the transnational social strike platform have been posing to each other as militants of the platform for years now, because it entails some objective processes that are what capital and political governance is made of today, and also subjective issues like political organizations from below, and the way to face it and contrast those processes that produce inequalities and injustice. Of course, there are many challenges to transnational organization, and all of these challenges are also entails also the climate class organization. When we started talking about climate class conflict almost 3 years ago now, we we said that we started from the hypothesis that the green transition was an international issue, hitting that would have hit the life of many millions of people around the world, and that it was crucial to start from there, and to those and from the effects produced by green policies, to rethink climate activism connected to class politics. So, of course, the transnational dimension was there from the beginning, because, first of all, because the climate issue is a global one. I mean, is an issue that you cannot think about facing starting from your own garden. No, you cannot solve it on a too local dimension. On the other hand, we see in the last months, and maybe years already, that the momentum, that the global momentum that the climate movement had gained a few years ago is kind of losing power, losing momentum. And we see this in the way that now it is more and more difficult to organize organize on big demonstrations or assemblies or moments of discussion and confrontation among militants.
But
Or
Jacopo, why this happens? Why do you think it happens?
it happens because I don't know clearly. I mean, there is no one single answer for this. I think for sure, I would say that one problem was the difficulty to bring the level of mobilization. I mean, having building an organization that could stand at the same level of the mobilization, because for a few years there were global mobilizations, but this didn't end up in a process of organizations that could keep that momentum on and give it continuity and new goals and new structure and so the problem of organization is a crucial problem of leftist politics in general.
In 1 minute, if you'd have to summarize, what is needed to be changed, or what do we need to do in order to organize transnationally for climate class struggle?
I think that one thing to do is to recognize that, as we already mentioned during this interview, to recognize that the climate issue is not something that can be an issue of only specialists of the topic. So to recognize that the climate issue is a transversal issue, which means also that climate activists should face the problem of how the climate issue is impacting the life of women, of migrants, of workers, etc. So if we start from there, and this is one thing that we are trying to do with TSS and with the climate class conflict. I mean, we face the same problems that other organizations face. But we ask ourselves how to solve these issues by recognizing that social struggles have to go together. We ask ourselves how and if the strike can still be a political tool to organize against the climate crisis, entailing production and social reproduction, keeping them these two dimensions of capitalist societies together. And I would say that these are the main. This is the main issue with transnational organization now, and to finding spaces for communication between people that find themselves in different conditions, but still connected, materially connected by capitalist processes.
Okay. Jacopo, Marco, thank you both for the discussion and for sharing your work with us. I invite you all to visit the Transnational Social Strike Platform, Precarious Disconnections website, by clicking the links in the description, where you can read the very interesting articles of Jacopo Bonasera and Marco Meliti on climate class struggle. Jacopo, Marco, thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.